Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the Safe, Vibrant, and Healthy Community Committee meeting. Today, we have one item on the agenda. It is cottage court and tiny house garages, external text change request.
Morning, Madam Mayor, committee members. Justin Rometta with Planning and Development. This item is, as you said, a citizen petitioned text amendment that was referred to this committee from the September 17 council meeting. So I just have a brief presentation to recap that discussion and the application by the applicant. They're here to speak on it as well. In general, in broad terms, this is a text amendment that is seeking to amend the definition of gross floor area in the code to remove attached garages from that definition as a means to achieve larger cottages and cottage court developments and tiny homes, which are limited in size through gross floor area maximums. So cottage courts, you can see here, have a limit of 1,800 square feet. The applicant is proposing an allowance for a 500 square foot garage, which would bump that up to 2,300 square foot. The other dimensional requirements, the 30-foot height limit and the 450 square foot accessory structure limit are not proposed to be altered. Tiny houses currently limited to 1,200 square feet. Applicant is proposing a 350 square foot allowance for a garage, which would result in a 1,550 square foot maximum tiny house with an 800 square foot max footprint. No change to the allowable height, which is 26 feet and 2 stories. So mechanically or kind of technically how the ordinance will be amended, as you can see here, this rather lengthy definition of gross floor area is proposed to be altered by deleting that last sentence, which is what includes attached garages in that calculation of gross floor area. So that's proposed to be struck and replaced with, again, the 350 square foot allowance for garages with tiny houses and 500 square foot for cottages. In your backup material, there's some discussion of these potential impacts. Clearly, this would lead to larger cottages, tiny houses, increased size and bulk, which would lead to increased cost for potential buyers, potentially lead to a kind of more auto-centric development pattern, which is somewhat counter to the intent of the cottage court development and the tiny house building type. Garages are also easily converted to living space, often without the city's knowledge, so there is kind of the potential for an incremental, slow kind of creep in increase in living space if that is of concern. On the other hand, there is, this is proven to be a popular product. This change would allow some increased flexibility for these types of buildings to be built. Could also potentially result in decreases in impervious surface and other surface parking, as detached accessory structures and surface parking might be disincentivized if there's an allowance for larger garages attached to be built. So if that is of concern, one potential change or tweak could be limiting the footprint of cottages as well, just like tiny houses are today. Cottages have a maximum square foot limit, but no maximum footprint.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, so tiny houses today have a 1,200 square foot maximum square footage, but they also carry an 800 square foot maximum footprint. So to go to 1,200 has to be 2 stories. Cottages only have the 1,800 square foot maximum size, no maximum footprint.
So the detached accessory structure, that is the footprint for an ADU? the 450? If you help me understand what that is.
It's more a detached garage, storage shed,
Okay.
anything other than the house. Yeah.
Okay.
It's just a quick note on process. We're still very early on in that, between 1 and 2 on the diagram here. So this is your consideration of whether to authorize the text change, which would go to the council, the full council, if you recommend it out, and then through the standard process, which includes the planning commission, public input and engagement, and then eventually back to council for a public hearing. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I know the applicant's here as well, and
Yeah, I do want to hear from the applicant, but should we actually let's hear from them first and then ask questions, because we might get answers to some of our questions. I have a lot, so if you could come up, please.
do you want your slides from last time? Yeah. I'll start and go backwards. Okay. It's just there. Okay.
Good morning, Mayor, council members, committee members. My name is Jason Meadows. I'm with RDU Consulting. I've been performing civil engineering services in the Raleigh market for almost 20 years. I have designed approximately 5 cottage courts that are either completely built and sold out or somewhere along the way in construction. I've drawn another half a dozen around Raleigh, so intimately familiar with this development pattern. And I bring this to you today along with 2 of my building partners here. We have Ryan Johnson with Revolution Homes and Chris Hodges with Redeeming Development Group, which both are actively developing cottage courts as we speak. So this is very important to maintaining the cottage court pattern. I'm going to start at the back of this slide show here with a couple of projects that were recently built. This is called Jean Drive Cottages. It is off of Lynn Road at the end of Jean Drive. This is 14 homes on a site that formerly 2 single-family homes existed. These units are 1,800 square feet of heated area plus an attached garage. You'll see the courtyard in the central area there with a rear-fed alley to serve the rear units for vehicular access. This is just one example. This is another view of the same project. Again, 1,800 square feet was kind of the heated area as the prior gross definition allowed for. Not until I believe it was a tiny home text change and an accessory structure text change altered the gross floor definition. So these units that we're looking at currently can no longer be constructed as a cottage court unit. This is another cottage court project by Redeeming Development Group off of Powell Drive. Again, this is, I believe, 10 units at the site of one former home. Again, right at the 1,800 square foot heated area, which was how it was prior observed, permitted, and approved for these cottage court units. Again, with an attached 2-car garage. Mr. Hodges can speak on a little bit of the economics of that plan, but I believe that most of these units, along with Jean Drive, were extremely popular, with quite a few of them being pre-sold before they were completed. So I'll just move backwards a little bit more. This is another image of the Powell Cottages project. I think it's our opinion that the 1,800 square feet provides you with a nice 3-bedroom, possibly 3-bath home, 2.5 bath in most cases at minimum. But currently, with the language that I will say is maybe an unforeseen circumstance of those 2 prior text changes, will now result in the attached garages being deducted from that gross square footage definition. So the resulting area, if we decided, or if the build teams decided to build an attached garage, which the market really wants for our single-family homes, you would be subject now to approximately a 1,400 square foot heated area. I'm not aware of anybody that's currently building 1,400 square foot heated area homes as a detached single-family home in Raleigh. I do a fair bit of townhome development as well, and design for those types of projects, and most of those townhomes will fall in the 1,800 to 2,000, 2,200 square foot range. So this is really about the economics and the viability of the cottage court pattern to continue to provide basically what has been provided in the past prior to those two text changes altering the gross floor definition. So the way that Justin presented it, I respect that, I appreciate it, but it's not that we're asking for larger units, we're simply asking for the status quo for, at minimum, 5 cottage courts that I've been involved with up to this point. So here's a little bit of a summary. Hopefully, we'll be able to allow attached garages to remain an option as previously permitted and as desired by our single-family home buyers in this market. We want to build a versatile product to meet market demand for many other buyer types that offer a 2-car, 3-bedroom, 2-bath option. Townhomes, for example, are probably an option on most of these sites if the cottage courts are not able to get back to a little bit more of square footage than where we currently are. And again, the 2-car garage is very important for these types of detached home models to work. The overall goal here, if we have to detach these garages and still provide garage parking with a breezeway or something along those lines, for example, that will result in additional sprawl, possibly additional clearing, disturbance, larger lot sizes, loss of density, et cetera. So the goal here is to bring that attached garage under the house footprint, reduce the overall sprawl and lot size, and still make cottage courts a viable option. And ultimately, this will allow for modest homes on smaller lots instead of huge houses on every lot. So we work on a per lot basis, if you will. That factors into the economics of the entire project. So if you lose density, these projects may not be viable. And then ultimately, in my opinion, that will result in more townhome development, which is fine, plenty of townhomes, but the single-family detached product is extremely popular for folks that want more yard area and just a little bit more elbow room. So I think I'll conclude with that and take any questions, and also offer Mr. Ryan Johnson to come up and speak as well.
Hi, good morning. One thing I did want to kind of follow up with is we've got a lot of people that are moving to the area that buy electric cars. So think about it, it's a computer on wheels. So that's where we have a lot of customers, wanting chargers, in the building, the houses we're building. And so, a lot of times they want to park them in the garage. So when a lot of our customers, I'll see large SUVs will be parked outside, but electric cars are going to be inside. So that's one of the things, is this is going to eliminate those people from buying products because they want somewhere to park the car inside. So that's one of the things we're seeing. The other thing is, like he had mentioned, a detached garage, it takes a lot more impervious, and we're clearing more of the backyard. We're seeing a big shift, even in 5 Points and in these smaller areas, where they just want one attached garage so that they have a bigger backyard. You can keep trees, more green space for family, pets. So this would help with also on these developments. And then a lot of these developments are not close in that are walkable areas. They're in larger parcels that are off Millbrook, Lead Mine Road. So you do have some walkability, but you need a car to get places because there's not the bus infrastructure like you have close in. So this isn't going to impact kind of the close in density that we have a lot of times in the frequent transit or within the city's bus system. These are going to be further out areas too. So you still need cars. So even though we're trying to transition to more walkable, these are going to be built in areas that are still going to need cars to get around. So I just want to mention that part.
Good morning. Christopher Hodges, Redeeming Development Group. So you saw a couple of our products that we've done. I believe we were the first completed cottage court in the city of Raleigh through the work. We weren't the first?
It was Fillmore Cottages. I did that.
But that was a condo.
Yeah, okay.
So in terms of the single family type type development that we're talking about, not a condo type concept. And so, what we've really been seeing, so we've done 2 projects currently, as you saw, under the old rules. We currently have one across the street on Powell Drive that was purchased under the old rules. And so now I'm delaying development, waiting for a change, because otherwise I have to change my entire site plan to make it work, because we had started.
How would you have to change it? Can you be more specific?
So we would either have to go to some additional detached, so I'm going from a 85 feet deep lot to usually about 125 to 130 deep lot, to do that, and or change to either no garage and just surface park, or some type of carport type option that's not as desirable to an end buyer, because keeping bikes and stuff, they can't enclose it. So that would be the changes that would need to be made, or I'm going to 1,400 square foot houses, which make it very difficult to really make the economics work, because we're already limited where a typical single family homes now is probably 2,400 square feet. We're already limited down on both height, so we're usually having to rake the top floor anyways, so we're not doing 9-10 foot ceilings. We're actually doing a 9 and an 8 with a rake to get it for the height restriction. So the overall massing actually is significantly less than a typical single family home from what we've seen. So, and I think the buyers are really important. So generally the buyers have been either couples or young families, first-time home buyer types, and or people that are selling a larger home, and this is kind of their forever home, scaling down. And so they're singles and couples. They don't need 5 or 6 bedrooms that are being built, because all of ours so far have been in R4. So a little bit further out, that's where I can get generally bigger lots. These are 1 to 3 acre lots, or a combination of lots is where we've seen it really work. They were platted in 40s, 50s, 60s kind of deal. Usually it's the original owner's family that's selling the land, that grandmother or mother died and she had been in there since 1952, and they're selling it. And what we found also with the neighbors, because we always have to work with the neighbors, that if I say, oh, I'm going to rezone and put in townhomes because I can, that's a really hard mountain to climb. But they really do like, even though it's like, well, there was only 1 there and now you're putting 10, they like that it's single family homes in a single family home neighborhood, because that's all that's currently there and been there. So there's politics, there's all the things that we have to, deal with. And like Jason stated, we're not trying to change the rules. We're just trying to go back to how we've kind of always done it, is what happened in that text change, adding a attached garage to the gross square footage definition that only affects 2 housing. That would be tiny homes and cottage courts. Because it doesn't matter on a single family home what the gross square footage of the house is. There's no limit to that. So it only limits 2 housing patterns, the tiny home and the cottage court, which then makes it very, very difficult to make the numbers work for us.
Could you talk a little bit about the economics? You compared like 1,400 square feet to like 1,800 square feet. I think some people would say, oh, well, 1,400 would be more affordable. But that probably has to do with financing and all that being it. I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around that part.
So yes, overall, it would probably be a less expensive product, because generally we're paid on a square footage basis, right? It's 300, 400, 500, whatever the market will bear. However, there is a point where I can't build a house that small and actually sell it for a profit. So we would just revert back to, I can build 7 $1.8 million houses, or I can build 16 $650,000 houses. Because my overall costs and my margins can work. So it really creates density and affordability. Is it making $200,000 houses? No. I'm not going to tell you that it does, because I'm paying between $1.2 to $2.5 million for a single family house in Raleigh to then tear it down. But with the increased density that I'm allowed in Cottage Court, it does allow and make the numbers work to get the increased number of units on a specific piece of property and sell them for a much lower cost that's more affordable for, these scaling down home buyers, these older folks, plus these, first home buyers, young families.
So some other things to think about is somebody that's not in this room are banks, lenders. Like, they have certain ratios that we have to work through. And so that's our limit. So if you look at 400 square feet, so I had to do the quick math just to think, okay, what is that? So if you're $100 a foot, that's $40,000. If you're $500 a foot, like 5 points, that's $200,000. So it's a value difference. So a lot of times banks, and the challenge we have is fixed costs. Think about the fixed cost of a house. Land is the main one. And then if you have a house, you have a kitchen and a master bath or a primary bath. So those three things are fixed costs that no matter how big the house is, you're gonna have them. So now your price per square foot, it's gonna be a cheaper house, but now your price per square foot's gonna go up. Now lenders are gonna look at it and be like, yo, it doesn't appraise, it doesn't work. So with a lot of the projects we do, we're kind of limited on what we have, the products we gotta put where, and how big the lots are and how many we can get is based on what the end loans are gonna be for consumers and what's their risk tolerance and how much they can put down. Because if it doesn't appraise, now they gotta put more money down, so it becomes less of an option for people that are looking to do an 80% loan or an 80-10-10. So you really gotta look at those fixed costs, which variable cost is the square footage, and everybody thinks, oh, price per square foot, but really you gotta look at the fixed, and the only variable you have is what you're putting in for the extra 400. But the other thing is that Chris didn't mention is 3-bedroom, 2-bath is huge because it gives a young family room. You look at these townhouses, they're all like 2 bedrooms on the 3rd floor and a bedroom on the 1st floor. Who's gonna put little kids on the 1st floor and parents are on the 3rd floor? It doesn't make sense. So this gives them an option where you got 3 bedrooms, 2-bath within that space. At 1,400 square feet, it's hard to get that usable space for a family. Usually those would be probably just 2-bedroom, 2-bath. So it's also what you can fit in that space.
Okay. I still have some questions, but I'm gonna, questions?
Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. I'm going to push back a little. I live in a 1,200 square foot house that's 3 bedrooms and 2 baths that was built in 2000 with no garage. So I do want to uplift those of us in this city that really do love that square footage. And in no way am I saying that what you're saying is invalid, because I totally understand what you are. But I just want to give voice to those of us who completely love our homes that are smaller and without garages. With that, I do want to ask, can you speak to your stormwater regulator? How do you guys deal with stormwater with such density on a maybe acre or 2 acres and putting all of that?
Very expensively.
Sure. What you will find generally in the cottage courts is they're very much less impervious than a townhome community, even though they are more dense than a conventional single-family subdivision. The space that it still takes to build those cottage courts result in less impervious than townhomes generally do. And I compare those two. I've done it a couple times this morning, but the reason I compare those two is because that is the other default option should the cottage courts become no longer viable to build. But certainly if we are now, I think to respond to your question, I live in 1,100 square feet. I have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. My bathrooms are both 5 feet by 8 feet, which is exactly the smallest dimension that you can have for a tub shower, a toilet, and a single vanity. So I appreciate, and I live in Johnson County, I live in Clayton, and I would just state that I don't know how many people are building that in Raleigh. I think the density that we can get in Raleigh with some of the other development patterns result in these smaller single families being left behind because the land basis is so high. I could go back and try to find some metrics on, available new build single families in Raleigh and see what those square footages may be.
I'm not at all trying to tell you that my lot sizes are much bigger too. So like it's 20 years
Sure.
ago I got
Yeah,
it. So I'm not comparing the two. But
Sure.
in that question, I think what I'm looking for and what I would research as we go through this text change process is not just the impacts on your property, but what does that look like to the surrounding, if you're in the middle of a single family home, the subdivision, what that does there. I've been meeting with, 5 Points is my district, and so a lot of concern with runoff from new development and totally washing out backyards in 5 Points specifically. So that's what my concerns are in this, but in no way am I trying to say that, it's totally different in my house than what you're proposing.
Ultimately, a lot of development, depending on where you are in Raleigh, the land basis to put a surface stormwater device is prohibitive, so we will go underground. The underground infrastructure results in no more runoff, no less treatment, no less capacity, no additional runoff beyond what a surface device would. And what that allows you to do is provide for additional open space or amenity area on top of those devices. So it's rare that the residents would really know, like, I'm walking on top of some stormwater detention facility or a water quality control, device. So that is another part of the economics of going dense, is that you no longer have the opportunity for a surface device, which they can also be nuisances with ponded water and things like that, that you have to consider for a neighborhood and a residential area.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Councilmember Patton?
Yeah, I have questions for the applicant and for staff. So I guess since y'all are at the mic, I'll start with y'all. Can you speak to, you gave some loose intimation of your average sales price, but could you all speak to, in general, how much your products are going for?
Sure. So far, the two projects on Powell, those were sold in approximately summer of 2022. And I believe the lowest price was around $525 up to about $640 was, in that huge run up during that time. So that was 10 units on Powell and Driftwood. On the Gene Drive product, that was sold in summer of 23. The lowest one on that one was, I think, about $591 up to about $712. The one at $712 was an anomaly. They added about $80,000 worth of options on that. The average was in the like 663, I think, if I remember correctly, was the average of all 14 homes, was about 663. I don't know what the average, I know that the rest of the houses on the street that were new are now trading over $1 million. So that was kind of, but they are bigger. But they did about 7 new construction homes on the street, and then at the end of the street, we did the cottage court, and those are bigger, probably 2,800 to 3,200, and those are a little over $1 million now, where ours are still, in the 675, call it. So.
And then have y'all built,
Did you want to add something?
So, yeah, so our land cost,
I want him to mention the land cost, because in that time, that's, we talked about fixed price, the land, and the appraisals, and how big a house needs to be. So I think that's gonna impact too, because where's land going here?
yeah, so I paid about, for Powell, I think I paid $952 for the lot and spent about $400,000 on the infrastructure. Infrastructure has gone up considerably since then. Last May, a number of new stormwater rules came into effect in the city of Raleigh. So all projects going forward, we're having to capture and treat 100% of the impervious. That was not the case before that. There was some other rules. You can probably speak exactly to that, but that's basically how I understand it. So my lot cost on the Powell was, I think, about $135,000 was my raw cost with no profit, because I'm the builder and the developer. It was about $160 on Gene Drive, was my raw developed land cost. Those were running about 40,000 a lot. Now I'm 60 to 65,000 a lot on my development costs on an average development because of the increased stormwater and just the cost of infrastructure improvement. So, and I'm having to pay significantly more for the raw land.
So Chris, what are the ones now going at? Those 130, 160, what do you think lots are gonna be?
So let's see, I can do it because I know what I paid for it. And I just got the budget back. So let's see.
But to answer your question, Ms. Jones, is that all this now, there's some more requirements for stormwater, so impacts are gonna be less to neighbors because staff's giving, we have to do stormwater plans for a lot of these now, especially based on the size. And then the new tax change is gonna be changing a lot of the stormwater directions, so we'll have less runoff in a lot of the areas.
So I'm now at 190 for the one that's starting in the next couple of weeks on Powell for my raw land costs. So and that's 15 units. So, significant amount of cost in a per unit that I'm already 200,000 in before I've started construction of the building.
Gotcha. One more question I had for the applicant team. So y'all have described what you've built under the old rules. Have any of y'all built under the new rules? You have like a before and after comparison?
No.
Okay.
I know the implications of it, but we have not pulled a permit under the new rules. We were surprised when he brought it up a couple months ago when I was finalizing the plan.
And to be honest with you, I'm very involved in the text change process. I'm very involved in.
Can you
the
step
new-
a little closer to the mic?
Very involved in the text change process as well as the stormwater draft manual. So that's not completely selfless. I have to learn that to do my job as well. But the overall thought in my head when I saw this was like, this is just an unforeseen circumstance of trying to address tiny homes and accessory structures, and the consequences are going to affect negatively the cottage court. And we haven't talked a lot about tiny homes because I haven't designed any. Tiny homes kind of fit into this just by default, but certainly could be removed from the conversation if we thought that was just egregious to try to grow the footprint of a tiny home with a attached garage. I don't know. I can't speak to whether or not a tiny home buyer really needs a garage or not. It's just the fact that those are the two development patterns kind of lumped together. But yeah, I didn't realize this. I was advising Mr. Hodges and and Brian along the way, and it caught me off guard, and I was like, this is a huge problem that we just didn't foresee because, again, those text changes were tiny homes and accessory structures. Nothing about cottage courts specifically, so I just missed it. But I try to stay ahead of it, and this is why we're here in front of you. It's because I'm passionate about the cottage court project. Development pattern, just because I've done several of them. I think they provide a great neighborhood feel to a more dense option while still not being the more dense townhomes, but not the single families that would cost $1 million plus. So.
And I think one of the things that staff was worried about, because it was not limited, is technically I could build a cottage court house with a 16-car garage and an 1,800 square foot house before this, or a 4-car or 5-car, which would obviously add to the bulk. So when we put forth this text change, we did limit to a 2-car garage for a cottage and a 1-car garage for a tiny home, to kind of capture some of that language to make sure somebody wasn't, doing something where they're building these massive garages that they know they're going to convert later, behind the scenes and all this stuff that would technically be illegal, but to make sure the massing doesn't get crazy where somebody could build this massive garage that there's no real rule against. And so that's why we added some of that language, which I think helps with kind of the overall thought in improving rather than improving the language around it, rather than really detracting from the already reduced square footage.
Gotcha. And I have several questions for our staff. Can I?
Go.
Thank you. All right. While you're coming to the podium, Justin, I always, every time we talk about these, I also am reminded that I too must live in a tiny home. and I also don't have a garage. Can you go back to, can you pull back up the staff presentation?
Yeah.
So the 350 is a single car garage and the 450 is the two-car garage? 500 square feet is a two-car garage? Is that standard?
Minimum allowable.
I would say there's
20 by 20 is the absolute minimum allowable. You can't fit much in that besides one
Okay.
car. We try to also,
400.
because most of our developments. They need to-
They can't hear you, especially when.
Okay, so most of our developments are served by the City of Raleigh sanitation. And so we like to put in the garage space to hide the trash and recycle. So that's why we added a little bit more than the actual minimum garage dimensions. So those can be hidden because you have pretty dense housing, as you can see, so you don't have trash cans just sitting around everywhere. So that's why we went slightly over what a minimum dimension of a garage is allowable to add that.
Okay, so 20 by 20 is 400 square feet, so that only speaks to the cottage court part?
So one thing we try to look at is give designers flexibility and creativity, is if we give them a number of that. So for example, we build our houses above code. We use 6-inch walls versus 4-inch. So what happens is the width of the wall is included in the square footage, even though it's not within the floor of the structure, it's outside. So if structurally you got to have a thicker wall, now that's part of your square footage, but it's not usable space. So we're using numbers that give flexibility and allow for structural changes and things like that, not just here's a limited square footage. And also, like you mentioned, to put the 3 different trash units in, recycling and, is that what you're asking?
I'm just trying to understand how large a single-car garage is and a two-car garage is.
That's it. Yes.
So 350 and 500 are reasonable.
So just to be clear, Pat Young, Planning and Development. I think the bare minimum is 200 for one-car garage and 400 for a two-car garage. Certainly accept the representations made by the applicant that these additional square footage would provide a little bit of flexibility with things like storage bins.
Got it. Thank you. Helpful. Okay, and then I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this clearly. Justin, are you aware of how many of these projects were built prior to this text change? How many have been built since?
I don't have exact numbers. We don't track this type of development like we do others. I do think that the examples that the applicants have given today probably encompass most, if not all, that were built under those
Got it.
previous rules. Yeah.
Got it.
I have a follow-up question, too. We had one set of rules, and these homes were built under that. What prompted the text change?
Yeah, great question. So if I can go back to, so there were 2 text changes. One was the development of the implementation of tiny house rules, okay? During their deliberation of that, the Planning Commission actually discussed this issue, and they considered whether or not attached garages should count towards square footage, maximums or not. Ultimately, they landed in that they should, basically for 2 reasons. One is that they felt that garages, regardless of what's inside of them, contribute to the overall size and bulk of the structures. And the other being that, as I mentioned earlier, the kind of readily available ability to convert that space to living space, right, after it's initially constructed. So that was one text change. The second was when we did an overhaul, basically, of our overall accessory structure rules. This was also in 2022. Staff had found that this language here, there was an existing exclusion for on-site parking in the calculation of gross floor area. And the intent of that language was that things like structured parking for apartment or mixed-use developments did not count toward any square footage maximums. And so this language that is proposed to be struck was then added to make that clarification that if we're talking about garages, whether they're attached or detached, that square footage was actually capped in some amount. So that was the intent behind that specific change.
So when this change was made, nobody foresaw some of what the issues that are being brought up today?
Let me try that. Yeah. Pat Young again with Planning and Development. To Justin's point, it was intentional to try to incentivize and encourage the development of these cottage courts and tiny homes on more traditional infill lots in a more transit-oriented fashion. So they would be smaller and less auto-reliant and auto-focused. I think the big thing that we did not anticipate, to the mayor's question, and that you've heard from the applicants today, was the run-up in land prices, right? So this was done right in the middle of that run-up, which was from early 2020 to mid-2022. And I think what we're seeing in the market and what we're hearing from all of our clients is the land basis, as they call it, the cost of the land is so high that you can't get enough per square foot on these smaller unit types, right? So adding the garage makes the market viable and economically viable, even though they're more costly than what we had anticipated or intended. And that's all based on the land cost accelerating. Does it make sense what I'm saying? I'm trying to get at your question.
So I have one other thought on that, and we got a determination when we did our Powell. So there's also very specific rules on parking setbacks in a cottage court, which I believe is 90 feet. So I can't surface park anything in the front yard unless it's behind a garage. So that means I have come in from the back because there's a 90-foot front parking setback. Am I correct on that? 90-foot?
We're arguing over it.
That's how I understood the rule.
Let's hear from Justin.
So there's a 90-foot setback that applies in cottage court for surface parking that applies to kind of pooled, like shared parking lots and parking areas, but that's not applied to individual driveways.
Just to follow that up, that is not in writing. Then that is not my experience through the 5 cottage courts that I have designed up until now. I think that is a recent interpretation that the actual driveways for those units didn't have to comply to that either 50-foot setback behind a principal structure or behind screening or 90 feet otherwise. So the prior way that staff was interpreting it, again, there's nothing in writing that says driveways do not have to comply to those setbacks. So while we had access to the garage from the driveway, it wasn't specifically allowable to use those 2 parking spaces or 1 parking space in the driveway as true parking. I can actually provide a comment from a cottage court that didn't make it where we got that feedback. So just to be clear, that setback, that parking setback was always in our forethought through the prior design of, some of the cottage courts.
And I think to be fair to Justin, that would always be brought up, not at development plan, but at building plan, when I've already got my site developed and I've already got my houses developed. And then it would come up like, oh, you can't park a car on this site. So, something has to be changed, because I don't think we want big parking lots either, on these. That's generally not what, at least any customer that I've met wants to, buy a $600,000 house and park down the road and walk, walk in the rain in January in Raleigh with all their groceries. So.
Councilmember Ford?
Yeah, I have a more general question for the applicant. I'm sure all 3 of you will get up to the mic at some point. And but I know You indicated you've done 5 of these, and is it all 5 of yours been in Raleigh, or have they been in other places?
Yes, ma'am. The original Fillmore Cottages is off of Fillmore Street at Cole and Wade, close to the north end of Five Points. The Mordecai Cottages, which is about to go vertical, that's over on Cortland in the Mordecai neighborhood. Hargett Cottages is at the intersection of Swain and Hargett. The Jean Drive development, Mr. Hodges here, and then the Powell Drive Cottage Court as well. So those 5 are real projects. I believe there are others. I'm not keen on all of them.
Okay,
There
how
may
many
be one.
how many do y'all have in the pipeline now?
My understanding that Mr. Hodge has one currently that he mentioned on Powell, as well as prospecting for a potential for 2
And they're
additional
behind you
ones.
giving a baseball signal, so I said it's all 4 on this side,
And then, and then Revolution Homes has one more as well. So yeah, 4 total.
okay, and can you kind of tell me like where they plan throughout the city of Raleigh? Are they all on one particular side of town, or are they kind of dispersed throughout the entire city, or?
I would say that there's a clear, distinct difference between the ones that are downtown, so the one I mentioned in Mordecai, and the one off of Hargett and Swain. Those are generally more dense, smaller units with only a 1-car garage. That is a build-for-rent product that specific developer does. Mr. Hodges and I believe Mr. Johnson will build these as for sale products, not for rent products, and that does affect some of the metrics, but as Chris mentioned, most of the cottages that he has done are in an R4 district. So as you move away from downtown, somewhere up off of Western Boulevard on the north end is where Powell Drive is, and then again Jean Drive is off of Millbrook and Lynn. So getting kind of well outside the Beltline.
Yeah, I'm familiar with your ones in Powell Drive. I was the District D council member when those came up, and had a lot of conversations about those. So.
Has anyone told you how happy they are to live there, or?
No comment on that.
I know we did have an interesting relationship with the neighbor there, and ultimately they're very satisfied. The immediate neighbor, and Ms. Jones mentioned the runoff, and we had an unfortunate drainage pattern there with that neighbor where our drainage basically ran underneath their driveway pipe. So we did some specific mitigation measures there to keep them happy, and she was the most learned neighbor that we had ever run up against, but we made her happy somehow. So, neighbors are tough, but I think in general, we try to work very well with them to move forward, so. Thank you.
Christina, go on.
My question is for staff. And as you're coming up, with these garages, the 300, the 500, are those required, or in the future, could that be that they're built without garages and then we're increasing the square footage space because it'll be allowed to take over the garage space?
So the city hasn't required any parking for several years now, right? We removed that from the code several years ago. So no parking is required for any type of development. The garages certainly aren't required. If the garages were built, and so say someone built up to the maximum, so they built a 2,300 square foot structure, 500 of which was a garage. If they came into for a permit to then finish that garage space into living space, which would be required, the permit would be denied.
But what if they just didn't put a garage at all? What if they just said 2,300 square feet of living space?
That wouldn't be permitted to begin with.
That wouldn't be permitted.
Yes.
Okay.
As proposed. As proposed, it is still an 1,800 square foot structure and with an additional allowance for up to a 500 square foot attached garage.
Okay, well, that helps clarify, because for me, I was just confused of now we can just build 2,300 under this rule if we change, but I'm wrong, so thank you.
You had something on there offering a solution. It was the big list of things, like hey, here's some of the impacts. Can you put that back up, please?
Sure.
Okay. All right, so one of the benefits is potential decreases in surface parking. issue, though, would be considering limits on the footprint of cottages and or reducing the accessory structure footprint. Are there unintended consequences in doing that? I don't know. It's like, I understand what y'all are saying, and I understand the finances and whatnot. And what I'm listening to, I'm trying to come to that solution. It's like, okay, consider limits on footprint of cottages. And again, what I'm concerned about is we come forward with something like this, we make this change, but we do a limit on footprints, and then all of a sudden, we can't build those either. Have we tested this out at all, or do you have any thoughts on that, staff? And
Yeah, I would defer to the applicants on what impacts it might have. I'll just say, one of the potential benefits that we heard was that there's potential for less impervious surface, more compact sites, because there would be no need for detached accessory structures. But that language, there's no language to guarantee that, right? So that is an option that if that were a true concern, that there could potentially be, in exchange for the additional garage space, some additional limit on other structures on the site that could further limit the bulk and the impervious surface on the site. But I defer to the applicants on what the potential impacts on that might be.
just before you go, so you're referring to like other detached, like a shed or something? Is that what you're?
It could be either or. So again, tiny houses do carry a 800 square foot max footprint. So to get up to the 1,200 square feet, you've got to build up and do 2 stories, right? Cottage courts do not have that. So there could be an option for a footprint allowance there without increasing the overall square footage. But there also could be a potential to either limit or reduce or eliminate that 450 square foot allowance for detached structures as well.
They're saying like if you go up to the 2nd story, then you don't get the shed.
So does the applicant have any?
So in terms of talking about this, it would need to be one or the other, and maybe that's what y'all are saying, because on some, on my Powell Drive, my new project, because of the way of the layout, we are doing some detached because it's narrow and deep. It's a narrow lot and very deep. And so the layout is, and I can't load off of Powell Drive because it's a thoroughfare. So I had to rear load those anyways because they wouldn't let me have that many garages or that many driveways. So I have one cut and I have 7 narrow, deep houses with detached garages from the back. And then along the back of the site is our 8 with front-loaded, hopefully front-loaded garages that will have downstairs masters for those, for a lot of our folks that really desire a downstairs master. Most of them are grandparents. They can stay downstairs. Kids and grandkids can come over and live upstairs. And so there are some footprint requirements for some of that, but we've never done, we would be willing to, I don't need a attached garage and then a separate detached garage. I think that would be out of the spirit of what we're trying to do. So if we needed to clean up that language, I would be willing to do that. Maybe Ryan won't, but.
Well, some things we're not talking about here, that there are natural limitations on the footprint for your impervious of a lot. That's one. Number 2 is when we have to design the stormwater system, we're designing it for a certain square footage of each lot. So we're going to limit that for financial reasons so we don't have to have a larger system. So naturally, stormwater is going to limit the footprint of these structures as more than any number we put. And the other thing is, with the garages, if just to do simple math, so if you have a garage, you're usually going to put something on top of it, so that's 1,000 square feet. So then you're going to have about another, so 500, you're going to have about another 900 square feet or so on the first floor when you look, or less than 900. So was that 650. So you're going to have about 1,200 square foot of a footprint anyway for a single one of the cottage courts. So it's 1,800 with the 500 divided by 2 because you'll stack it. So that's going to naturally limit it as well. Yeah.
Ryan's correct, and part of the iterative process as we design a cottage court or even a townhome development is assigning a maximum impervious allowance for those lots. And generally, we provide for, obviously, the footprint of the unit, any sidewalk and driveway out front, which is, mandatory, and then we build in a little bit of, fluff, if you want to call it, so that those future homeowners could have a shed, or they could have a little bit larger patio, but I'm talking in the couple hundred square feet of additional allowance. To start allowing an additional like 450 square feet for a detached structure, it's just not built in from the development side because that would continue to drive up the treatment for stormwater. Whether or not they put it on that site in the future, we've already accommodated for it and spent the money on providing that. Secondly, detached structures will result in additional sprawl on the lot. It will result in additional lot sizes beyond what we've been able to produce to this point. I'll take you to, this is the Powell cottages. You can see that in general, the courtyard is in the middle of these homes. There's really no place where they could have a 450 square foot accessory structure. Same thing on Jean Drive, which is what you see here. Again, that area generally outside the units is all shared common courtyard area. Not enough space to put even a shed or another structure anything along those lines. So we talk a lot recently about tree conservation and imposing additional tree conservation. And again, the sprawl that would result from having to detach those garages, and everybody's probably searched for a home, Zillow, Realtor.com. There's a toggle for like, I want a 2-car garage or I want a 1-car garage. So like, it's that ability of those buyers to find the product that they want. A carport wouldn't show up as a garage in that type of search, or a detached garage, I suppose, would. But I think what you're hearing from us is that we would certainly be willing to trade some of that accessory structure size for the ability to continue to build these cottage courts under the status quo that has been successful in the past. So,
Could I make a suggestion to the committee, see where your thoughts are? I mean, there's obviously some room for compromise here, and what we don't want to do is duplicate. So that detached accessory stuff, I think, needs to be cleaned up. But what I was going to suggest is perhaps we report this out with no action taken, but ask staff to work with the applicant and see if they can come up with a compromise that they can bring back to the full council at our meeting on November 19th. Would you all be comfortable with that?
Yeah, I think that's fine. One thought I had, I definitely agree, like if the spirit is to reduce the amount of impervious by like limiting how many parking pads and like shared parking lots have to be built, then we should make sure the screws are tight enough that we're not then also leaving room for some other like more impervious to be added. So I agree with that.
Unintended consequence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would also be supportive of adding the footprint limitation similar to the one that exists on tiny homes already to the cottage court element to just kind of further keep within the spirit of these smaller homes with these smaller footprints. So I would be interested in adding that as you all go back and revise, assuming, seeing some head nods from my colleagues. And then when that comes back, one thing that would also help me is some market data on buyers and their preferences. I mean, I bought a home because it was what I could afford. It has no garage and it's fine. But like, obviously some people have greater flexibility than I did. And perhaps the presence of a 1 or 2 car garage is a determining factor. So I, either provided by the applicant or by staff, would be interested in market information on how much of a determining factor that is. So that's need.
Is everybody, staff? Can I have some reaction? You good with that? Okay, so I'll make a motion then to report this out with no action taken, but to direct staff to work with the applicant on the specific issues we raised related to the attached dwellings, the square footage, and also ask for market information. All in favor? Okay, that was unanimous, thank you. All right. I guess, any other questions, or, okay. I will now officially adjourn the meeting. Thank you. This is very interactive and in the weeds.
I mean, yeah, y'all can even see like how the